Let history speak. This is a long story, so please follow along and save it. Picture a time long ago, around 1200 BC, the Mycenaean civilization, a powerful and prosperous society in ancient Greece, was at the peak of its might. Majestic palaces dotted the landscape, trade routes stretched far and wide, and a rich culture thrived. But then, in a relatively short period, this once great civilization crumbled, marking the end of the Bronze Age in the region. What could have caused such a dramatic downfall? This is the story of the Mycenaean civilization and the mystery behind the collapse of the Bronze Age. The setup. The glory of the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans were not just another group of ancient people. They were a force to be reckoned with. Their society was centered around large, fortified palaces, like the one at Mycenae itself. These palaces were not only the administrative centers, but also symbols of power and wealth. The rulers of these palaces were like the CEOs of a modern-day corporation, controlling every aspect of life in their domains. The Mycenaeans were excellent warriors. Their armies were well-trained and equipped with advanced bronze weapons. They were known for their military campaigns, both in Greece and beyond. They raided neighboring regions, expanding their influence and bringing back treasures. Their military might was so feared that other cultures thought twice before challenging them. Trade was also a crucial part of their success. They had established trade routes with other civilizations in the Mediterranean, such as the Minoans on Crete. They traded in luxury goods like precious metals, fine pottery, and textiles. This trade brought in wealth, which in turn allowed them to build more elaborate palaces and support a growing population. The Mycenaeans had a unique writing system called Lineal B. Although it was mainly used for administrative purposes, it was a sign of their advanced civilization. They could record information about their economy, such as the amount of goods produced and traded, and keep track of their workforce. The confrontation, the gathering storms. However, not everything was rosy in the Mycenaean world. One of the first signs of trouble was the emergence of external threats. Around 1200 BC, a group known as the Sea Peoples started to cause chaos in the Mediterranean. These were a mysterious group of pirates and warriors who came from various regions. They attacked coastal cities, disrupting trade and causing destruction. The Mycenaean palaces, which were used to being in control, now had to defend themselves. The Sea People's attacks were unpredictable, and the Mycenaeans found it difficult to mount a coordinated defense. Their military, which was used to large-scale campaigns against known enemies, was ill-prepared for these hit-and-run attacks. At the same time, there were internal problems brewing. The Mycenaean society was highly hierarchical. The rulers at the top of the pyramid held most of the power and wealth, while the common people had to work hard to support the system. There were likely growing tensions between the different social classes. The commoners may have resented the fact that they were doing most of the work, while the rulers enjoyed the fruits of their labor. Another issue was the environment. There is evidence that around this time, there were significant climate changes, droughts became more frequent, and the soil became less fertile. This had a direct impact on agriculture, the backbone of the Mycenaean economy. With less food being produced, there was not enough to feed the growing population. Famine started to spread, and people became desperate. The Mycenaean palaces, which relied on a stable supply of food and resources, began to feel the strain. They had to make difficult decisions, such as rationing food and cutting back on non-essential projects. This led to a decline in the construction of new palaces and the maintenance of existing ones. The turning points, the first cracks in the system. As the external threats and internal problems worsened, the Mycenaean civilization started to show signs of weakness. The first major turning point was the decline of trade. With the sea peoples attacking trade routes, merchants were reluctant to venture out. The flow of goods between different Mycenaean regions and with other civilizations slowed down significantly. This decline in trade had a domino effect on the economy. The palaces, which relied on the income from trade, had less money to spend. They could no longer afford to pay their workers, and many people were laid off. This led to an increase in unemployment and poverty. The social unrest also started to boil over. The common people, who were already suffering from famine and unemployment, began to rebel. There were likely small-scale uprisings in different regions, as people demanded better living conditions and a more equal distribution of resources. The rulers, who were used to having absolute control, were caught off guard by these rebellions. The Mycenaean military, which was already stretched thin by the sea people's attacks, now had to deal with internal unrest. They were torn between defending the palaces from external threats and suppressing the rebellions at home. This division of resources weakened their overall military strength. The climax, the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization. The final blow to the Mycenaean civilization came in the form of a series of attacks on the palaces. Around 1200 to 1100 BC, many of the major Mycenaean palaces were destroyed. Archaeological evidence shows signs of widespread burning and looting. The palaces, which had been the centers of power and culture for centuries, were reduced to ruins. The reasons for these attacks are still debated. Some historians believe that it was a combination of the sea people's attacks and internal rebellions. Others think that it could have been the result of a power struggle between different Mycenaean factions. Whatever the cause, the destruction was complete. With the fall of the palaces, the Mycenaean civilization as a whole collapsed. The writing system, Linear B, was lost. The trade networks disappeared, and the population declined significantly. The region entered a period of darkness, known as the Greek Dark Ages. The collapse of the Mycenaean civilization can be compared to modern-day situations in many ways. The external threats faced by the Mycenaeans are similar to the challenges that modern countries face from terrorist groups or hostile neighbors. Just as the Mycenaeans had to defend themselves against the sea peoples, modern countries have to invest in their military and security to protect their citizens. The internal problems, such as social inequality and environmental issues, are also relevant today. In many parts of the world, there are growing tensions between the rich and the poor. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is widening, leading to social unrest. Climate change is also a major concern, just as the droughts were for the Mycenaeans. It can have a significant impact on agriculture and the economy, leading to food shortages and economic instability. The downfall of the Mycenaean civilization serves as a cautionary tale. It shows that even the most powerful and prosperous societies can be brought down by a combination of external threats and internal problems. It reminds us that we need to address social, economic, and environmental issues to ensure the long-term stability of our own societies. The Mycenaean civilization may be long gone, but its story lives on. It is a story of power, ambition, and ultimately, decline. It is a story that can teach us valuable lessons about the fragility of human civilization and the importance of working together to overcome challenges. If you like this story, please follow, like, and share it. The aftermath and the legacy of the Mycenaean collapse. Let's pick up where we left off. The Mycenaean civilization has crumbled, and the Greek Dark Ages have begun. The once bustling palaces are now in ruins, and the people are struggling to survive in a world that has changed dramatically. But what happened next? How did the people of Greece rebuild their lives? And what was the legacy of the Mycenaean civilization? The setup: the Greek Dark Ages. The Greek Dark Ages, which lasted from around 1100 BC to 800 BC, were a time of great hardship. The population had declined significantly, and many people had fled their homes in search of safety. The once prosperous trade networks had disappeared, and there was little economic activity. The people who remained in Greece had to adapt to a new way of life. They lived in small, decentralized communities, rather than in large, palace-centered societies. There was no central authority, and each community was responsible for its own defense and survival. The writing system, Linear B, was lost during the collapse. This meant that there was no way to record information, and much of the knowledge and histories of the Mycenaeans was forgotten. Oral traditions became the main way of passing down stories and cultural values. The confrontation: rebuilding from the ashes. Despite the difficult circumstances, the people of Greece slowly began to rebuild. One of the first steps was to restore agriculture. With the help of new farming techniques, they were able to make the most of the limited fertile land. They grew crops such as wheat, barley and olives, and raised livestock like sheep and goats. As agriculture improved, the population began to grow again. Small communities started to expand, and there was more interaction between different groups. This led to the development of new forms of social organization. Instead of the hierarchical Mycenaean society, a more egalitarian system emerged. People had more say in the decision-making process, and there was a greater sense of community. The decline of the Mycenaean palaces also led to the rise of new forms of art and culture. Without the strict control of the rulers, artists and craftsmen were free to experiment. Pottery, for example, became more diverse in style. Simple geometric patterns replaced the elaborate designs of the Mycenaean era. The turning points: the emergence of the polis. One of the most significant turning points in the post-Mycenaean era was the emergence of the polis, or city-state. The polis was a self-governing community, usually centered around a city and its surrounding countryside. Each polis had its own laws, government, and army. The polis was a response to the need for security and organization in a changing world. The people of Greece realized that by coming together in a more formalized way, they could better defend themselves against external threats and manage their resources more effectively. The development of the polis also led to the growth of democracy. In some palaes, such as Athens, the power was gradually transferred from a small group of aristocrats to the common people. This was a revolutionary idea at the time, as it gave ordinary citizens a voice in the government. Another important turning point was the revival of trade. As the Greek communities became more stable, they started to trade with each other again. They also established new trade routes with other regions in the Mediterranean. This trade brought in new ideas, technologies, and goods, which helped to further develop the Greek civilization. The climax: the rise of classical Greece. By the 8th century BC, the Greek civilization had undergone a remarkable transformation. The Dark Ages were over, and a new era of prosperity and cultural achievement was beginning. This was the start of classical Greece, a period known for its great philosophers, artists, and politicians. The polis system had become well established, and each city-state had its own unique identity. Athens, for example, became known for its democracy and its contributions to literature, philosophy, and art. Sparta, on the other hand, was famous for its military prowess. The Greeks also made significant advances in science and technology. They developed new methods of architecture, such as the use of columns and pediments in building design. They made important discoveries in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The legacy of the Mycenaean civilization was still present in the new Greek world. Although much of the knowledge and culture of the Mycenaeans had been lost, there were still traces of their influence. The Greek myths and legends, for example, likely had their roots in the Mycenaean era. The transition from the Mycenaean collapse to the rise of classical Greece can be compared to modern-day situations. The rebuilding process after a major disaster, such as a war or a natural catastrophe, often involves a similar period of adaptation and innovation. Communities have to come together, re-evaluate their priorities, and develop new ways of living. The emergence of democracy in the Greek Palaeus is also relevant today. The idea of giving ordinary people a say in the government is still a fundamental principle in many modern democracies. It shows that the struggle for political equality is not a new phenomenon. The revival of trade and the exchange of ideas in the post-Mycenaean era are also similar to the globalization trends in the modern world. Just as the Greeks were able to learn from other cultures through trade, we are now able to access information and technologies from all over the world. The story of the Mycenaean collapse and the rise of classical Greece is a story of resilience and transformation. It shows that even in the face of great adversity, human societies can adapt and thrive. It is a story that reminds us of the power of human ingenuity and the importance of learning from the past.